So a warm welcome on this, at least for me, cold day in Berlin. I was told this is not exactly cold for Berlin, but I'm coming from Mexico. So welcome on this cold day in Berlin. It's such a pleasure to be here. Welcome everyone in person and also to our online audiences. This is our November edition of Data for Peace Dialogues. We named this session Generative AI in Government and Policymaking. And then just to make the title a little bit bigger, so you have more things to read, 1 year with ChatGPT, retrospective and glimpse into the future. Maybe the subtitle was not even necessary, having in mind what are all of the things that have been happening even in the last couple of days. I think the events that can fit maybe in a year, but hopefully we will have time to discuss this as well. We are welcoming you in front of the Data Innovation Lab, and then also in this beautiful space at the GovTech campus Berlin. Thank you so much, GovTech, for hosting us here and giving us this already an idea that holidays are coming, which is really nice. Well, first, maybe because I realized just chatting with a couple of people here, I realized that maybe not only GovTech Campus, but maybe Data Innovation Lab is also a new institution for so many people because it was just established in June. So this is an organization basically established by the German Federal Foreign Office and GovTech Campus Berlin. As the name says, the lab as a sort of experimental ground for different ideas to be tested in the, how we like to say it, a human-centered world, but also data-driven methodologies and solutions. So the Data Innovation Lab aims to play this crucial role in future where data can be applied in a positive way, in an ethical way, following the ethical principles and guidelines, and where it can contribute to sustainable development and global cooperation. In the central, as the central part of the work of the Data Innovation Lab are also data governance and ethics, creative data solutions, and data awareness and literacy. And I think all three of them come very useful when we discuss the generative AI, especially generative AI in policy making. So now, again, just to introduce myself as well. So I'm Branka Panic, and I am a senior advisor to the German Federal Foreign Office, to the Data Innovation Lab, and I am a moderator for this event tonight. And I want to say that we are experimenting with this type of format as well for the first time in hybrid format. I saw that some of you also joined our previous online sessions, only webinars. This time we are testing this new format where we also have, and here this is exactly what I wanted to say, as my colleague Gunda already wrote, hello to our online audiences. So just a technical detail for our online guests as well. If you wish to introduce yourself in the chat now, just for you to know, we do have a screen in the room where people will be able to see who you are and where you are joining us from, because we really want this event to be a sort of an inclusive space for all of us who are here in person and all of the people who are online. Feel free to tell us where you are joining us from, in which institution you are working with, and what brings you to this topic of generative AI in government and policy making. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I just want to give a short of introduction to why we actually gathered here today. And for those of you who are actually following the entire generative AI field, you maybe remember that in November last year, ChatGPT was piloted, published, made available to general audiences. So we kind of wanted to use this momentum of 1 year. Those anniversaries are always useful to reflect on what actually happened in the previous year, maybe even beyond 1 year, right? With the ChatGPT, the entire world of AI did not start, but some things did change. So we will go into exploring this and also trying together to evaluate some of the happenings, some of the discussions that are happening today, and also envision the future. So the ChatGPT, I think, and some other generative AI models kind of move the entire conversation of AI. Before that, I have a feeling that this conversation, we in our camp, so to say, had a feeling that it's happening everywhere, but it was actually quite in a silos in different institutions, ministries, academia, or tech companies. And now suddenly a year ago, it became a conversation for everybody, for general public as well. And this is why this is becoming such an important topic for governments and for policymaking. A lot of institutions immediately reacted. So we will have an opportunity today to hear from some of our guests how their country, how their institutions reacted to this. Just by a quick search online, I actually managed to find so many resources out there. The first reactions coming from the United Kingdom, the document that was published, the use of generative AI in government, immediately instructions how the government should react to this new technology. Then understanding the benefits of generative AI in the public service in New Zealand, guide on the use of generative AI in Canada. Other institutions we have, we will have a guest speaker joining us from OECD. OECD published initial policy considerations for generative artificial intelligence. World Economic Forum published the recommendations on responsible generative AI. So I think the message is clear. A lot of effort has been already invested in 1 year just to give these recommendations. In certain cases, people still feel, when we talked with institutions, they still feel there is a sort of a gap and not exactly clear understanding of how they can position themselves now towards this new technology. So this is a sort of a teaser as well for our speakers, maybe to share some things in their institutions and how their institutions were responding to this technology. So with all of this, we want to pause. We want to see what is the state of the play. We want to see what have been all of the challenges with this technology. What are current challenges? Are there any opportunities? We want to look into ethical and regulatory aspects of generative AI in government, to explore ethical considerations and much, much more. We have an hour and a half in front of us. And we have an amazing lineup of speakers who are joining us in person and online, starting from Hans Christian. I will actually start from you, which feels kind of strange to say welcome as this is your home and Berlin is your home. But Hans Christian Mangelsdorf, who is a chief data scientist at the German Federal Foreign Office, welcome. Karine Perset, who is head of the OECD AI Policy Observatory, joining us online. Hello, Karine. Can you say hi so we test your sound as well?
Hi, Branka. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. This is just a short welcome, and thank you for joining us, Karine.
Thank you for inviting me.
And then Armando Español, who is affiliated at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at the Harvard University, joining us institutionally from Harvard, but I believe that Armando is actually by chance also in Germany. So we almost managed to get him in person in Berlin, but happy to have you joining us online, Armando.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rick.
Perfect. Unfortunately, I have to say that our fourth speaker, Julia Reinhardt, who is an expert on AI policy and governance, and especially EU AI Act, unfortunately got ill, and she will not be able to join us. And we all know how generative AI topic is crucially connected to the developments in the regulatory space, especially now the EU AI Act. But this will be, and this is also my invitation for anybody in the audience as well to join the conversation and share. I know that a lot of you bring a lot of expertise to the table. So this is also an invitation for all of us to have this open conversation and talk about regulation as well. So before I give a floor to our speakers, we wanted just to break the ice in a quick 2-minute survey and ask you a couple of questions that are, there will be, I know it's an afternoon for many of us that we are tired, but it will be a very quick Mentimeter exercise for all of us in person and online. You can either type menti.com and enter the code if Mentimeter is new for you, or simply scan the QR code. And then we will have a couple of questions for you to feel the room, to test the, I don't know what would be expression in English, test the ground, see what are our feelings now with generative AI. And I see a lot of thumbs up, which means that a lot of you already filled in the first question. So maybe we can pass, or yeah, we actually had to, bear with us. Hybrids are new to us. We had to open first the question, which is, looking back over the past year, developments in generative AI make me feel positive, optimistic, hopeful, negative, pessimistic, fearful, or both. It really depends from the application, from the situation. And here we have the numbers going up. I think the majority of people, of course, I know the question is quite superficial. It depends from different applications, but it's also interesting to see how many positive people are out there. While we are still on this question, I want to do a quick round with our guests to see your quick answers. Positive, negative, both. Hans Christian.
Definitely positive.
Positive, great. Karine. Can you hear us? We cannot hear you.
I'm definitely both.
Both. Okay. Armando.
Yeah, both.
Okay, good. We'll have time to dig deeper into this, but we do have a quick second question for you. The advantages offered by generative AI in government are too significant to overlook. It is imperative that we leverage generative AI in policymaking. So this is basically this question of the advantages are immense and we should be using them. We should use generative AI in policymaking. The majority of people agree. Did this sound surprised? Sorry, I should be objective. The majority of people agree. Let's see the second question, which is basically the opposite side of the question. Risks from generative AI are too big, and we should not apply generative AI in government, even with existing guidelines and regulations. So we don't have a lot, but we do have some guidelines in AI. So majority of people disagree. Okay. And do you think this is a bit maybe provocative for some of the people who are coming from the government? Do you think governments are ready? At first we put government, which was a huge question mark, which government? So we decided to be more diplomatic here and to ask, do you think governments are ready for generative AI? Yes, absolutely. Not at all. Maybe, who knows? Maybe, who knows? We will see. So this is maybe, who knows is why we organize this panel, and then hope to get more clarity from our speakers and experts. So majority of people are saying, are governments ready for generative AI? Not at all. Okay, we still have a lot of things to do. Do we, I'm not sure, do we have another one? This is the last one. Okay, great. So I'm just quickly seeing that people are introducing themselves in the chat as well. I'm trying to see a country or something. I see institution. Okay, based in Somalia, covering Horn and East Africa region. We see people joining us. Embassy of Kosovo in Berlin. We also saw people joining us and registering for this event from the entire world. So this will be, I think, a very interesting conversation to have from the German perspective, from European perspective, but also looking at the entire globe and other countries as well. Okay, now we broke the ice. Hopefully our speakers, I'm not sure if they feel more comfortable now to talk about this after the survey, but we will see. And I will actually give a floor to each one of you. So we will have 5 to 7 minutes of interventions from our speakers. So the question was just this reflection on the previous year, on the generative AI, on ChatGPT or other models that are piloted out there, and what is your feeling now? What are your conclusions from the previous year? What are your hopes, your fears, and how do you see the entire field? And I will try to maybe mix speakers now a little bit, since Yulia is not joining us, and maybe start with Karine, who can give us maybe, I know that OECD AI Policy Observatory has been a crucial actor in this field for many years, much more before others discovered AI through ChatGPT. Karine, I know that you are deeply into this conversation, so I'm giving first the floor to you to give us a sort of a personal overview of the state of generative AI in policymaking and government. Karine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Branka. I have a short slide deck. I don't know if I can share it, if that's helpful or not. I don't have to, but some of the items might be helpful to have visually. Maybe I could do that later if that's.
I think you can. Just give us a second. I think you will be able to share the screen if we mark you as a co-host.
Yeah. I will behave, I promise.
Or not. Karine, do you mind to go ahead without slides?
I can go ahead without slides. Or I can send you the slides if that's helpful too.
Perfect. Sounds good.
I can do both. Okay, so there were three kind of key items that I wanted to go through today. I wanted to thank you first of all for inviting me and say that you already introduced me. So I had the AI unit in the Digital Economy Policy Division at the OECD, and so we've been working on AI policy since 2016, and more specifically on generative AI over the past year. And so there are three things I thought might be interesting today, and two in particular that I thought might be interesting to cover today, which I thought would be first of all the findings from the Hiroshima AI process that we ran this summer. So basically, this was a survey of G7 AI countries on process and priorities for generative AI, including in the public sector. So this kind of gives their feedback on what are their priorities in terms of benefits and also areas of concern. The second thing that I did want to mention was generative AI use at the OECD and how we've been using generative AI and more specifically ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo to power what was previously a sort of a large database of policy information that was a little bit hard to navigate and a little bit boring, because it's 1,000 policy national AI, over 1,000 national AI policies, and they're structured, but they don't give you a story. So if you want to know, for example, well, what have successful policies been in the area of AI upskilling? It will give you a list of policies, but it won't give you a story, and it won't bring in the qualitative, the quantitative data to back up, the qualitative AI policies. So that was the second thing I wanted to bring up. And then I also wanted to bring up, potentially, if we have time, a few findings on the strategic and responsible use of AI in the public sector in Latin America. That's a little bit dated, but I thought some of the things were still relevant, but I'm not sure I'll get time to get there. But anyway, so starting with the Hiroshima AI process. So again, this is an ongoing process. It's in the context of the G7 countries, and they have a Hiroshima AI process on generative AI, which is really about a number of things. But one of the key things that I thought would be interesting was a survey we ran last summer, and going through some of those key findings of the survey. I'm sorry you can't see the slides. So we looked at key opportunities and risks, priorities in terms of values-based principles, policy gaps, and current measures, a potential collective international approach in some areas, and then national and regional initiatives. So I won't get into this without being able to show it to you, because it's a little hard to follow on a deck unless I send this to you, Branka, immediately, and you can share the slides. Because it's quite a bit. Maybe I can just give you the top. I'll just send this to you, Branka, in case you have time to display it, and then go over what I see as the top messages from this survey. So in terms of main opportunities, first of all, governments identified productivity gains from generative AI as by far top number one, and associated with that, promoting innovation and entrepreneurship. So those are closely linked. But thirdly, improving healthcare. So those were those main opportunities. And of course, improving healthcare, but also innovation and entrepreneurship. These are linked with not just innovation and entrepreneurship or productivity in the private sector, but also very much in the public sector as well. Especially in certain countries where it was ranked higher, productivity gains in the public sector was ranked higher. In terms of main risks in achieving sort of the goals, in achieving those and benefiting from those opportunities from generative AI, the three main risks were considered to be disinformation by far, or information integrity, as it's called in the United States, or manipulation of opinion. So that was by far the top concern in all of the G7 countries. And I think it will also come up as the top concern in all of the other countries that we're currently surveying, the OECD countries. We'll see. I mean, I'm just expecting that it might be the top, given the election periods coming up and so on. The second risk was intellectual property right infringement. And the third risks was related to threats to privacy. And so you see that kind of dichotomy between productivity gains and threats to privacy. And then in terms of, so we distinguished between urgent and important priorities. So we had, the most urgent priorities in, like, they needed to be resolved quickly because they were urgent problems that were going to materialize quite quickly. And so from those urgent priorities, privacy and data governance were the top, fairness and lack of bias were the second, and fundamental human rights were the third in terms of urgency. And then in terms of importance, it was also human rights, and human and fundamental rights were also at the very top. But then in terms of importance, you also see security and robustness of AI systems, and making sure that AI systems are secure and robust. And third, that they promote democratic values, bearing in mind that that's, the G7 is a group of democracies, obviously. Moving on, we also asked...
Corinne, sorry for interrupting. Just a quick note that we do have your slides now. If you want to guide us through the slides, feel free to do so.
Okay.
So we will just bring them up on Zoom now.
Oh, okay, great. I'm on slide 5.
Perfect.
And maybe I'll just go through the G7. I won't have time for the rest. We'll see. probably I won't, and I might have to accelerate with the so let me know when you, well, anyways, I'll start talking to the gaps.
Please do.
The
We
next
do have a space, so feel free to guide us, yes, through OECD as well.
Okay, so if you go to slide 5, you'll see this is really about the gaps that were felt by member countries in existing or underway policies to address the challenges of generative AI. And that was, again, no surprise, disinformation, promoting transparency too, responsible use of these technologies, governance, intellectual property rights, including copyright. And so here again, while different countries' perceived policy gaps were slightly different, transparency, responsible use, and disinformation were the most significant. And so we expect that, to really be the prioritization moving forward. And that's why we're organizing, for example, a global challenge on mis and disinformation in the context of the G7 with a number of partner intergovernmental organizations and other organizations. In terms of the urgent actions, if you move over one slide, because again, there's a difference between the importance and the urgent and the urgency. In terms of urgency here, it was really providing on the right hand side is kind of a summary. It's really providing effective tools, for actors from public and private sectors for ensuring safety, quality control, and capacity trust building, as well as engaging in dialogue. So those were viewed as the most urgent and important priorities that from the G7 perspective. And then again, moving into important actions, and again, we distinguish those because we do think they're quite different, although they were less different than we thought. This was really the important was the effective tools, and including voluntary codes of conduct as most important actions, because most important actions in the long term. So those are the key points out of that survey last summer. And I won't get into, I don't think I have time to get into the search engine that we where the OECD is using generative AI to search databases of national policies, and both quantitative and both qualitative currently, and now we're working on including also qualitative information. So this is a joint project with Mila, which is, I think, very helpful for governments, because governments often have access to a lot of information, policy initiatives, and they'll, just like we do on our member countries, and we'll have a lot of information on, the start date, the budget, so we'll have, sort of more objective information on the policy, but that doesn't really tell you much about the success of the policy, the usefulness of it. And so what we're doing here is, comparing it to other policies. How does it compare to other policies on the same topic in other countries, using generative AI, and then bringing in, the results components. So now, how do these countries, having used these policies in specific areas pertaining to generative AI, but not just pertaining to AI writ large, we're just using a generative AI tool to help us do this, do it in a real-time manner so that countries can look at it when they're interested in it and not have to, manually sift through these thousands of policies and charts showing evolution over time. So that's another one that I thought was important. But I think my 5 minutes are well up, so I will pass the floor back to you, Bronca.
Thank you so much, Corinne. This was very informative and useful. With your permission, we will also share slides, and then look forward to, in the Q&A part, dig deeper into some of the information that you presented here. We will also share in the chat the publication, the initial policy considerations for generative AI, that was sort of our guidelines for also a thinking process for this session. So thank you very much for co-authoring this piece, which also brings me to our next panelist and speaker. And you also mentioned some of the Latin America work in your introduction. We at Data Innovation Lab are deep believers as well that we need to exchange more on preparing us all for this world of generative AI, and to look beyond our own, of course, into our governments, into OECD, Europe, European Union, but beyond. So we are very grateful, Armando, to have you with us, joining us and sharing this perspective of Latin America. Just as a sort of an introduction, because you will see that I'm a huge fan of published papers that are giving a very good resource for getting to know what is happening in different places. You also co-authored a piece on generative AI and what should governments in Latin America do with your colleague, Elizabeth Sullivan at Harvard. So can you, Armando, share with us now your thinking, your personal perspectives on this technology, reflect on the previous year or more, and try also to help us understand what is happening in Latin America. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Branka. No, I think it's of course always a pleasure to be with you, with Karin, Hans. I think I have met you in several panels, and it's always great to be with you and learn from all of you. And for me, yeah, the perspective from Latin America, as we were discussing, is like this has been quite an active year, of course, like as for all the world. But I have seen that there is a lot of motivation now to do things. So that will be perhaps my first take. But still a lot of questions on what to do, how to do it, what to implement, what to start working on. So I started working on these topics in Latin America back in 2018, and still the interest was not that much. There were other priorities. There were perhaps other topics that were relevant for countries in Latin America. We were thinking about reducing poverty, thinking about environmental protection, reducing some kind of inequalities in the region. So the technology and innovation side was not such a priority, but after generative AI, I think things have definitely changed. More and more governments want to get involved into this kind of work. And that's something that, for me, it's at least very much an interesting thing to see, and to see this interest, but at the same time, they are navigating on a lot of questions in which basically we will see all countries have the same capacities to answer, and perhaps to have proper answers to the issues that we are facing right now. So I send you my slides. I don't know if you will be able to go through them. They're very short, but it's basically based on the work that you also mentioned that we developed with Liz Silvan at the Berman Klein Center at Harvard University, and that's pretty much a Medium post in which basically we were answering to this big question, that is, what should governments in Latin America do? Like, what should governments do in this precise moment? So we were facing this question, especially like mid-2023. It was June, July of this year that we were getting a lot of questions of what to do. We were working with some governments. I was working with some governments in Latin America in this aspect. So we were developing the Dominican Republic's AI strategy, Uruguay's AI strategy being updated, working with Brazil on regulatory questions that they were planning to do something on the regulatory level besides what is being done in the Congress. Mexico or some cities in Argentina thinking of developing AI ethics lab. So basically we were working with them, but still the question was like, okay, we prepared all this working agenda before. We were basically basing all this in a different kind of technology. Generative AI was not that important. We were planning this for some years now. And now we have generative AI, and now we don't know if we're going to face a lot of changes. And basically what we saw from that, and if you want, we can go to the next slide, is like, we said like, okay, there's 6 specific measures, and for my 5 minutes here, I'm just going to mention 3 of them, which I think are really important for perhaps this to open up this discussion, and of course to show you what we recommend in Latin American countries to do. So in the next slide, you'll see that we have our first recommendation is to continue. Yeah, it's not a matter of, okay, we already had policies. So countries like Colombia or Chile had already been implementing policies for the last 3 years. So they should change those policies. They should reassess then we believe that by looking into those policies, they should definitely continue with the work. Yeah, they should continue to work on those policies and basically develop implementation capacities. We believe that that was a good road, and that generative AI should not mean a big change in the way these policies were being implemented, because we were talking about developing data infrastructures, digital skills, basic elements for the deployment of any kind of AI system, and generative AI was not going to be different in that aspect. Perhaps it's going to have, it's a matter of a scale of we're given bigger systems, bigger capacities, but not a matter of changing the policy agenda in a way in which was very disruptive. So that was perhaps the first recommendation. Then the third one, as I say, I'm going to concentrate on the three most important ones, is define the societal guardrails that we believe were the most important elements to be defined. So basically, generative AI is facing us with big challenges about disinformation, misinformation, some kind of creations, and some kind of data being generated that can be actually harmful. We have to define those limits. What are those limits, and what is going to be accepted and what is not going to be accepted? It's now time to prioritize that, because before that, perhaps we were being a little bit more free to innovate, and we were leaving some space for innovation. Now it's time for this, perhaps many of these countries and governments to start taking a little bit more of action and start defining what are the limits, the guardrails that they're definitely going to have there and are going to believe in, and that are going to basically follow under the implementation of this technology. And then we have this as perhaps one of the points which I think has been creating a lot of attention also in Latin America and in many other regions around the world, and it's about regulatory experimentation. Promote more, and for example, OECD also published this report on regulatory sandboxes. We believe that on AI, regulatory sandboxes, regulatory experimentation, and all the possible tools for regulatory experimentation, because we have innovation hubs, innovation test beds, we have policy prototyping, we have regulatory sandboxes. That's something that the region should explore more and more, because we definitely consider that we have to start building some good knowledge, especially within regulators and authorities in Latin America, about AI, what AI is being used for, what generative AI is definitely capable of achieve, and how it works, what are its limitations, what are its capacities, and so to be optimistic or negative on some of the points that AI can bring, but to have an informed, at least, discussion of all these matters. And then we said regulatory experimentation can be a way of doing that. At the same time, you can start to experiment, especially with the laws that you have already, because many of these laws are going to be highly disrupted by AI. So you have data protection regulations, but now you have IP regulations, IP law, many other regulations there that are, of course, a matter of experimentation, or at least of analysis under the next months. And it's not just a matter of accelerating regulatory decision, but at the same time to analyze what to do, and regulatory sandboxes and this kind of tools can be helpful in that regard. And from there, I think that very briefly, we defined that there are going to be in Latin America 3 areas of work. As I said, regulatory sandboxes are creating more attention. Sandboxes are going to be developed in Chile, Brazil. Other countries are seriously considering this. Colombia already has one. Proposed legislation, many Congress and Congress women and men are proposing new regulation on AI. And of course, we had this regional council in Santiago, this regional AI meeting that was a ministerial meeting that I think was in some way interesting to see some kind of joint position and collaboration between governments about this topic. And then finally, it's like, what are we doing? I'm now currently working with the Data Protection Authority in Brazil to develop this kind of regulatory sandbox on AI. I think that can be a good way of start to develop some capacities. It's going to be on generative AI, which is quite innovative for the region. And sorry, I think that hopefully we can have some good participants, some good generative AI. And the question is about transparency, data protection, and this technology, how is it going to operate under Brazilian law? And still, looking forward to this project and what we are going to learn in the next months. So that's pretty much my summary of the region and what's going on and the recommendations that we published some months ago. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Applause for you as well from the room. There's so many things that you touched upon, and I hope we will have a chance to hear maybe even more about this meeting in Santiago de Chile, which I think can be an interesting point here for us in Europe as well, to learn in which direction Latin America is going in establishing, I think, the AI Ethics Business Council, which is very interesting cooperation between UNESCO and Microsoft and Telefonica. So just seeing how this approaches to generative AI can be different also in collaboration with private sector and some other UN initiatives out there like UNESCO AI Ethics. I will now give the floor to actually our host, Hans Christian. Let's bring the conversation back home now from this road of OECD and different countries, Hiroshima Summit, Latin America, Santiago. Let's see what is happening in Berlin, in Europe, and even more locally. I think we have an amazing pleasure to actually talk with the chief data scientist of the Federal Foreign Office. So you maybe can share some insights of how your ministry is approaching this new technology, and then how we heard from both Karine and Armando how generative AI is not a new thing for us, right? But some things have been changed now when the technology started being massively available. So now, not the floor, but the mic is yours.
That's the most precious equipment tonight. Thank you very much, Branka, for getting us started, and thanks to colleagues Armando and Karine for those very interesting and thought-provoking pieces of discussion. So let's return to them during the discussion. But first of all, let me give you a few facts, and I was just double-checking. Actually, the last and still current German AI strategy is dating back to 2018. The first ever data strategy of the German government is dating back to 2021, if I'm not mistaken. So we're living actually in very interesting times, because so many different processes are converging these days. And I'm having here in the room colleagues from other ministries, from other data labs. And this is probably unique, because never before did the German government in each and every ministry make available resources to set up data labs. So there is about 70, 80 colleagues of mine who are in their respective ministry working on data and AI. And this is something that is testimony to the seriousness with which the German government as such is pursuing this trend. So this is important to note. Now, let's move forward a year. I'm pretty convinced that by this time in 2024, each and every ministry will, to a certain extent, use AI in its internal proceedings. That might still be experimental in some ministries, that might be more advanced and heading towards a productive use, but it's going to happen. I mean, as we are speaking, colleagues are experimenting intensively, and each and every ministry is experimenting with AI. There is not a single ministry that is not looking at it or has already been looking at that for quite a while. And there are different avenues. Some of our colleagues are approaching that using open source tools, are using what is there in the cloud, using ChatGPT, trying to make that available. Others are piloting, are running proof of concepts for strictly internal use of generative AI or large language models as such. So I'm pretty convinced that in 2024, we are going to see these efforts converge towards something that is ultimately going to lead us to a productive use of AI in day-to-day administrative processes in various ministries. And we should not forget that looking beyond ministries and other parts of administration, AI is already there. I mean, we are sometimes limiting ourselves to the ministries, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not where the huge workload, that's not where the huge administrative workload is usually happening. That's happening in agencies and federal agencies that are handling massive amounts of data on a daily basis. So we are well on our way. So reflecting on the last 12 months, you could argue, I mean, that would be justifying a little bit history. You could argue that all things came together in a perfect way, as if by design. Obviously, it was not by design, but those elements, having resources, having ChatGPT out there, having a vivid international debate about the use of AI, that's certainly helped all of us to propel our efforts and really move ahead quickly. So in a nutshell, governments tend to be late adopting new technology. That's true. But given the circumstances and the resources that are currently being made available, I think they are uniquely positioned to really determine what is really useful. I think this is going to keep us, this is keeping us busy, but it's still going to keep us busy for the next couple of weeks and months to really assess where does AI make sense. And from a this is true from a technological point of view, but also from a, well, from an ethical point of view, from a process point of view. And let me just reflect a little bit on that one. We will have to convince quite a few colleagues that AI makes sense, that it's helping, that it is serving a purpose, and that it is not just something to play around with. Then you have all kinds of things that you need to keep in mind, data protection, etc., etc. You need to make sure that systems, and I think, Karine, you mentioned that as one of the main challenges, is transparency, is safe, etc., etc. So that's a good reason for us at the German FFO, but also for colleagues in other ministries to look at what kind of regulation is actually necessary. I mean, we are currently working on an AI charter that is going to set a few boundaries for our use of AI internally in the house. Others are doing the same. And I think that's very wise, because only technology, a bit of regulation, not regulation for the sake of regulating things and trying to make things too complicated, but regulation is to a certain extent also within an organization quite crucial. And then the last thing, and here again, data labs at government level are quite active these days to provide the necessary, literacy, and to make sure that colleagues really understand how to use and how not to use AI. All these things are happening, so it's a fascinating time, and colleagues from my team know that days tend to be quite long and quite intense these days, but it's happening now. Just to finish this first intervention, believe me, by November, December 2024, we will all be using some form of AI. Thank you.
So we will meet in a year and ask another survey question. So we will check that one if all of the ministries are using AI. If I may, Hans Christian, ask immediate follow-up question, and maybe first a question to the audience. We will come back to the, I see hands already out there. I'm also looking forward to hear your questions and comments. But before that, just to see the hands up of how many people in the room actually know what are the projects that Hans Christian mentioned, like LLM uses in a federal foreign office or other or other applications in his ministry and work. Are you familiar what okay, this gives me a perfect then chance to ask you if you can tell us a couple of sentences, because for the online audiences, we saw 0 hands in the room, which is really why we want to organize this and get more transparency and clarity of how FFO is actually, maybe you can tell us about your AI project or other LLMs. Data Innovation Lab had another separate session, but obviously we have different audiences here. So help us understand what are these applications.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I mean, just reflecting on what we are doing, one of the most basic things that we want to do, or that we are currently preparing to do, is simply to go through these huge amounts of documents that you find when you're negotiating internationally, be it at the European level or be that at the UN level. I mean, simply to make sure that you have a huge data set and simply ask the machine, can you sum that up? Can you give me the gist of it, etc., etc. So very straightforward. You might say not necessarily very sophisticated, but this is a use case that is immediately understandable and accessible to everybody. Another use case that we're currently pursuing is to, well, unmask or to make available, let's put it this way, to make available the internal knowledge that we really have. I mean, simply going beyond the standard search algorithms and to make sure that you make available all your internal data sets, be they collected in your intranet, in your whatever regulatory systems, etc., etc. So make that available and searchable and usable. I'm pretty convinced that we are going to move towards something that would see the use of AI, or see AI being used to produce text, especially for certain standard texts, summing up the current status quo of a given topic, or even preparing or initially preparing speeches, etc., etc. That might definitely be use cases for 2024. So you might again argue it's not super sophisticated, but out of those bread and butter use cases, you would expect that colleagues come up with additional ideas.
Thank you. And an immediate quick one. Were you in a situation to give some instructions to your colleagues when ChatGPT was piloted to just prepare? Because what I'm thinking, and just I'm brainstorming this with the audience as well, I assume that there are applications that are more complicated, that need more investments, more development, more computing power, more data. And suddenly some of these tools became available overnight for all of us to use, including the employees in your ministry. And this is also a question that I would extend then to OECD and Harvard, or however you affiliate yourself with your institutions, how your institutions reacted to this now. Are there any like good practices that you can tell us? Did you ban the use of ChatGPT?
Well, I mean, in a way, everybody is using ChatGPT. So what we did, we did a bit of awareness raising. We didn't really prohibit the use of ChatGPT. We simply made it clear that colleagues should think twice or maybe even 3 times before using it. Because in the end, you cannot control the use of ChatGPT. Our ambition is clearly to have an internal solution that would never ever be as good as ChatGPT 4, but that would allow to implement a few very important use cases. So to encourage colleagues to come back again into our own internal systems. Let me just add one more element. I mentioned a few use cases, and those would rely on existing commercial or open source models. But what is crucial for us as well is to have the necessary hardware available, to have the necessary tech stack to allow ourselves to continue to explore. I mean, having GPU resources shouldn't be an obstacle. It should be a reality, and we are in the lucky situation that it is a reality. You might find that strange that a government or government entities are really investing into creating sandboxes. But I think with this kind of disruptive technology, it's super important that government is not only using what is out there, but is also keeping or building up the capacity to, well, not necessarily co-develop, but to have a deep technological understanding and the necessary means to do own stuff.
Thank you, Hans Christian. To Karine and Armando, as we were hoping to have a colleague who will cover the issues of EU AI Act, and I think it's somehow impossible not to mention this, having in mind this entire, I don't know how to explain it, soap opera that is happening in OpenAI on one side and in European Union on the other side with EU AI Act. If you have any thoughts on this, I know that you are not necessarily experts on AI Act, but how your work is guided or dependent on what is happening now in the EU in relation to AI Act. Karine, would you like to start?
Yeah, perhaps I can start. So the EU is 27 member countries. It's a majority of OECD member countries, and so they have obviously a very different mandate and a smaller membership, and but we work very closely with them on in areas which really would require international interoperability or even similarity or being the same. So, for example, we've been working closely on the definition of an AI system, updating the OECD definition of an AI system so that it's up to, so that it's future-proof and that it can be useful to the EU's legislative process as well as the Council of Europe's and others potentially. But we also have been participating in many other components of the EU AI Act and the implementation of the coordinated AI plan, which is kind of the, let's say, the positive, which is the benefiting from AI component of and the EU AI Act is the setting the guardrails so that based on risk. But in our OECD membership, I guess overall we do see different different approaches being taken by different member countries. From, for example, in the United States, there's this reliance, recent reliance with the executive order, Biden's executive order on public procurement and leveraging the sort of the massive scale of the U.S. government to not impose, but to promote or encourage definitely certain practices for responsible AI. But and in the EU we have the EU AI Act, but and then elsewhere we have different in the UK we have different approaches. But I think you can look at the differences, and that's what people tend to do, but you can also look at the similarities, and they're also, and if you look at what they're trying to achieve and then how they're trying to achieve it, there are similarities definitely in the risk-based approach. So you're not treating different AI systems the same way. You're treating them according to their potential impact. You're also in terms of similarities, you're also really looking at standards as the means to operationalize a lot of this, and so there's significant cooperation between different standardization bodies across the world. In fact, including the NIST, the CENSINIDEC in Europe, but also ISO, IEEE, and others. And so we look at those commonalities, and if you do look at those commonalities, you see that the approach may be different, but the end goal and some of the characteristics are similar. Then I think where we're left is the enforcement, and where and how do we do that, and who, and again, different countries are taking different approaches for enforcement at the national level, and I think the jury's still out on, well, how these different enforcement bodies for different types of instruments, legal instruments, will or voluntary initiatives will work, and who will take care, and how they will coordinate, obviously, because they need to coordinate, they need to share common definitions, they need to share common understanding of what are the risks, what are the incidents, what are the hazards, and that type of thing. So that's what we've been focusing on quite a bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Karine.
Yeah,
Armando, yes, go ahead, please.
It has a huge impact, the AI Act in Latin America. So we're in a very much interconnected world, and many of the things that are being developed in Europe, of course, have a huge impact in Latin America. As perhaps you know, this term, the Brussels effect, we feel it very much now with the AI Act. So basically, this idea that when something is being regulated in Europe, in Brussels, and decided, this is going to have an effect in many other regions, even in other jurisdictions. And in Latin America, we have been feeling that quite often, and I think the AI Act is not perhaps different from this Brussels effect, and it's not independent, and we're going through it. So we saw some research from some Brazilian colleagues that the Brazilian Congress is now debating their AI Act, which became a very independent project. They wanted to create their own legislation, their own. They drafted their own research, their own council of experts working on this. And the research of the Brazilian colleagues from ITS Rio basically showed that 70% of the AI Act in Brazil is inspired and based, and you can trace how connected then the connections with the European AI Act. So even if you try, or at least try to present these as documents that are completely separated, they are still very much influential, and the European standard and the European way in which the risks were defined, the way in which authorities for AI have to work on the kind of tools that are described in the AI Act, of course, have an influence in many of these countries. At the same time, I think there is something also special right now that as we go through the last months, is that we have the Council of the European Union in the presidency. We have Spain. So Spain, of course, has a huge influence in Latin American countries. The Spanish speaking materials and documents they produce also have a huge impact in the region. So of course, there is this big awareness from Spain of the AI Act, of working on it. They have been quite pioneers. For example, we have seen it on developing regulations for AI sandboxes, and something that they want to become the leaders of the AI sandboxes in Europe, also trying to promote this kind of idea of the AI Act being implemented even before it is adopted by the European Union. So Spain, of course, having all that kind of a pioneer vision with sandboxes, with what the AI Act is saying, is also promoting this in its negotiations and in its diplomatic relationships with Latin American countries. And we have seen many countries interested in following many of the things that have been developed. So, for example, for countries like Spain, on AI sandboxes inspired on what the AI Act is doing. So another way in which we are seeing this, and perhaps I think the biggest impact of the AI Act will be, as always, if it is approved. If finally the European Union decides and it is approved by the countries of the Union, basically that's going to be a great way of supporting, even if they don't want to, supporting these kind of projects and legal projects that we have now in congresses in many different countries in Latin America. So now in the Brazilian Congress, we have an AI law being under debate. We have in Colombia some proposals. We have in Costa Rica, we have in Argentina now being one presented. Also, we have one in Uruguay. So it basically all these legislators and congressmen and women see that basically this was adopted and the AI Act was adopted in Europe. That's going to look at some great justification and great motivation for countries in Latin America to start having something similar, to start having this first regulation. So it's a matter of waiting who is going to make that to take that first step. If Europe is doing that, I think many Latin American countries can follow. Of course, I think, and this is my personal note on that the AI Act has many elements that I think are quite valuable, are very important, can be a good way of approaching to many of these questions, but still regions such as Latin America have to be very careful with that kind of regulatory task and the way in which they're regulating AI. We still have a lot of things to develop with AI, a lot of solutions for the public sector, a lot of solutions for many other problems that we have in the region. So we have to see that regulation is not going to be a burden for the use of AI in the public sector, in the private sector, and many other sectors, especially in countries in which we can even count the AI projects being developed in public sectors with our fingers. Yeah, so that means that still we don't have all that experience as to, yep.
Sorry, I did not want to interrupt you. So many interesting things happening, interesting times for Latin America. for the European Union itself. Hopefully the adoption of the document will not be that complicated like here, and that will not have some opposite Brussels effect or something like that in Latin America, but we will be following carefully both processes. I did see hands up, and I will open the conversation now to the in-person and online audiences. For our online guests, feel free to type your questions in the chat and we will read them, or raise your Zoom virtual hand if you want to join us directly and pose your question directly. Our colleagues will connect you with us in the room. Joanna, I will give the floor first to you, and then we have another colleague here, but please introduce yourself first. Sure. And then tell us your question.
Okay, Joanna Bryson, a professor of ethics and technology at the Hertie School. And I've also been a member of the Global Partnership for AI, and I'm speaking there in a couple weeks. So I have a question for both Karina and Hans Christian about, because you both say you're already implementing it. So I was just speaking 2 days ago in Erlangen to Siemens and a bunch of top people in communication departments. But, and you know, as you say, a lot of people are just using it anyway, but it depends what you're trying to communicate. And they were saying that one colleague in particular said that they were doing contracts and they used ChatGPT 4, and all the lawyers thought the contracts were great as long as they weren't an expert in the domain. And then the experts were saying, this is only 90% of the way there. And then to fix it was actually taking longer than the time that was being saved by ChatGPT. So, so basically concerns going 2 directions. That's one. So have you really checked the productivity? So if you're using it, have you run into some real problems like that? And then the other question is the other way around. So you said you love to publish papers. One of my published papers this year is spamming the regulator. So have you thought about what you're going to do about the fact that now, I mean, it was bad enough when we were getting these identical emails all sent to us, right? At least that's pretty easy for conventional search to consolidate and say, yes, 700 people have sent us the ACLU, you know, letter or whatever. But are we going to have to legally restrict what law firms, because we've just made it so much cheaper to generate text. So are we going to have to innovate some legislation to make it possible to do the job well? Or is this just going to turn into spam where, you know, not actually factual things are being sent, and then spam consumers are making not actually factual summaries of these things, and somehow governance is all going to corrode itself?
Let's since we already have plenty of content here, give us 2 minutes maybe so we hear first the responses of the speakers. Hans Christian, would you like to start?
Yeah, very quickly, Jan, on these 2 very good questions. I mean, the first one, yes, that's definitely what we want to do. We want to check if productivity really goes up. And I completely agree with you. If it takes more time to fix a bad or 90% solution that is provided by a chatbot than to do it yourself, don't do it. So my hope is indeed that by starting with easier use cases or straightforward use cases, we will quite quickly understand if this is really a helpful instrument. And I would always be the first one to say, okay, if we don't increase productivity, then let's not use it. On the second one, this is a bit like once mankind invented cars, traffic lights became necessary. So you're having one invention and you're inventing something else to make sure that things are working all right. And yes, indeed, this is a risk. I mean, we're already at the German FFO using not really sophisticated AI, but we're using AI to partly automate the responses that we're sending back when citizens approach us. We're not doing that to keep them away from giving us a call. We're simply trying to make sure that we can answer more quickly. But very much in the same direction. Once you're having a generator that is producing spam, you're probably inclined to do something similar, just to make sure that you're able to counter the spam. But this is certainly not the objective. It's a risk. It's certainly a risk. But again, cars and traffic lights.
So you are thinking about some legal traffic lights to actually say, okay, we know you could produce a lot, but we only want to read one document per lawyer or something.
Most probably this is going to come. Yeah, this is my best guess.
Or in other scenario, tech companies will create another AI that will be able to recognize different spams in generative AI. Every technical problem ends up with a new technical solution that creates new technical problem, and so on. We are in a vicious circle. Karine, the question is also addressed to you. Would you like to respond?
Sure. And I think thanks, Joanna. And I'd like to echo a lot of what Hans Christian had said. And it's true that on the productivity numbers, we're at the beginning. We have a year, not even barely a year of hindsight. And now we're starting to get peer reviewed sort of real literature showing productivity impacts, real productivity impacts for specific use cases. So yes, there where we do run into problems and the productivity impacts are not clear, then they would not be used. They would not be recommended to be used, and many countries would not use them in the public sector. However, they would do so once the ROI and the accuracy is verified. So maybe that requires a bit more time. And then on your second question, will we have to legally restrict spam, disinformation, and so on? I think that here, and there's a bit of a widespread view that many of the current solutions we have, and we've dealt with spam and disinformation for a long time, that many of the solutions we have, just be the technical solution, educational solutions, policy measures, regulatory policy and regulatory measures, they just can't scale at an international level to some of the the what we might see coming, and so that we might need to use all of the policy instruments that we currently have, but then also come up with more solutions, and they might combine technical with policy, and policy by policy, I mean, depending on the case, policy or regulatory solutions. So we I think we're at the state where many countries are thinking what we currently have might not suffice, and it will take a lot more, and it will take all the involvement of all the stakeholders, because the governments can definitely play a role, but on the technical front will also definitely play a role, and also in explaining to policymakers what can or cannot work technically. So yeah, I would agree with that very much.
Thank you, Karine. Jana, are your students allowed to use generative AI? Quick one.
Why, yes, thanks for asking. Hertie School was one of the first universities that actually said that you should use it, but you should cite it. And so you have to say what prompt you used, where you used it, and how you checked it in a footnote. I have yet to see such a footnote.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question here. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, my name is, it's really loud, or is okay? Yeah, my name is Greta Hess. I work for the GIZ in a digital dialogue project, which is commissioned by the BMDV, the Ministry of Digital and Transport. And my question is to you, Hans Christian. So I was wondering about your commentary on all the different ministries individually starting to work on data and AI, and kind of the vision for the future in that regard. So you said in 2024, there will be some converging. Is there some projects planned on that? And then also, do you notice some differences or approaches, also normative stances regarding AI in the different ministries? And then my last question regarding this is maybe looking to other countries in Europe. How are they handling these kind of internal competency building innovation and AI use in the government? And yeah, so I hope that's not too many questions, but that's it. Thank you.
Shall we take them now? Because again, we have three in one.
Thank you. Quite a number of good questions. On the normative, let me start with the last one. On the, and actually my paper is full. I have troubles finding my notes. Sorry for that. Starting with the normative part. I see a lot of convergence when it comes to normative aspects, and this is especially true when we are, when you look at what is happening at government level between ministries talking about the AI Act in Brussels. There is a bit of a debate, and some of that has surfaced recently in the media as well. One of those questions being where to regulate general purpose AI systems or models. Well, in the end, there is a position. But still, there is widespread convergence, I would say, with slight nuances. In terms of convergence or converging trends when it comes to using AI, well, this is a personal guess. I think, and this is part of the question here that was posted by Mev Keelan. I expect, because Germany has this tradition of working in a decentralized way, that pretty much each and every ministry will want to have a sandbox and will want to continue to experiment. But there is a huge difference between having something as an experiment or as a proof of concept or even as a minimum viable product compared to something that is a productive service. In the end, if you are looking at those massive administrative processes like applying for visa, handling retirement payments, other social security elements, you would not want to use experimental stuff. You want to make sure that you have a standardized AI service or ML service or whatever that is well audited. Maybe we can have a bit of time to discuss that, because I would really be interested in your opinion as well, or the audience opinion. So I'm pretty sure that we will end up with a few productive services that each and every ministry can simply consume on whatever infrastructure. I mean, we have a few infrastructures that are being built up as we speak. But again, this is, for me personally, this is a huge difference. Did I cover your questions?
Yes, thank you. The only thing was the European partner countries.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. To be honest, and here Gunda, who's sitting over there, maybe has a bit of a better perspective later for the reception part. But I think everybody is a bit of in the same situation. Some governments decided to do it a bit more centrally, like our UK colleagues who are combined or pulled together some expertise in a dedicated entity. Most governments, especially in Europe, as far as I'm aware, take it from a security or even military angle. I'm, to be honest, but I remain to be corrected, or I stand to be corrected. I do not have a full picture about what our European colleagues are doing on the civil side. I mean, having labs, AI labs, etc., or sandboxes in their respective ministries. So maybe somebody from the audience, or Karin, you have more information on that, how other European countries are actually prepared and working on AI sandboxes or working within AI sandboxes. But I'm handing over the mic to Branka.
Well, Karin, while you are thinking about the question, I also just wanted to connect to Armando, what you wrote in your paper. Like one of the final recommendations, I think, was exactly thinking about how much we know about each other's work, right? How much we collaborate among each other, how much we share. And I'm just thinking now in that direction now, even in Europe, right? How much we know if we are not part of OECD or well, even if we are on a country level, we still don't know, for example, what other ministries of foreign affairs are doing. So I love this recommendation, Armando, that you are having for more collaboration in that direction and more sharing. So I would maybe just ask a quick question for you as well, if this is happening in Latin America. And then Karine, if you want to add anything on this question. I assume if that was a recommendation, that's kind of telling as well that this is not happening, right?
Yeah. Well, Marian, no, thank you. I completely agree with you. I think that's basically one of the biggest challenges that we have ahead. So having this kind of exchange of experiences, getting to know more, even within the regions, like that's something that we are lacking. And of course, you were talking about getting out of Latin America, perhaps in the case of Europe, the same, like going into other regions, it's very difficult. And I think that we can learn a lot. We can also get a lot of evidence of what is working and what is not working. So that's also very relevant. Like are these principles that are being proposed by some entities actually are having any kind of impact in countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America? So many of these questions that we have right now, and I think we have to be open to that kind of forums. So as you mentioned it, we have this forum in Latin America, this first AI regional ministerial meeting to start bringing countries together into this kind of work. And that's something that I think went well. We had the participation of more than 20 countries in the region. And I think they're willing to look into more experiences, not only between these countries, but also with many others, and to have this kind of platform for that kind of collaboration. And now that this is a great question also, because I can tell you about the latest project that I'm working on right now at Harvard. That is the Global Network of Centers. That is the project I'm leading now. That is exactly this, an opportunity to start bringing international centers, different stakeholders from around the world. So centers around the world, experts, policymakers, decision makers in different countries, and to start creating this kind of perhaps experience exchange, lessons learned that we can exchange between each other, and putting all this together. We know that that's not an easy thing to do. We will live in a fragmented world, in a world in which there is increasing fragmentation, tension, but still we believe that we can learn a lot from each other, and especially save a lot of resources and be more effective on the policies that we're developing. So that's also a great question to share with you, this project of the Global Network of Centers, that we are willing to participate with many others in this kind of collaboration and increase this international dialogue. I think that's fundamental.
Thank you, Armando. A great message also for all of us. Karine, do you have any inputs? We do have more questions though, and I am aware that we are almost at the end of the time. Would you like to add?
Sorry, my camera is not stable. I keep having to reattach it.
I kind of noticed that, but don't worry, it's all fine.
Yeah, I'll however boost this with my computer this week. But no, I just would caveat the statements about the EU with the EU coordinated plan on artificial intelligence that's been reviewed a first time by the European Commission in 2021, that will be reviewed again in 2020, that sets a measurable goal of targets, and that will be reviewed again next year in 2023, starting in January, and that sets very specific targets on EU member countries, and this is on the civilian side, and sectoral priorities, including mobility, including healthcare, including many of the sectors we've been discussed. So I would caveat that by saying, and that also has numerous components, but those are some of that also sets investment priorities and things like that. And just one point that I would I think is still accurate to say, looking at a lot of the implementation of national AI strategies or policies at the national level is really including in Germany, but elsewhere too. And it's not actually specific to AI. We've seen this in digital strategies. We've seen this in national digital security strategies and all kinds of global strategies that require a cooperation of many different ministries in government. So different policy communities that don't necessarily speak the same language, have to deal with the same issues, is really having that, a common vision that the different policy communities can adhere to, and then having that leadership that comes from the top. And that's kind of what we've noticed over the years, is that it is important to have a leadership or coordination function that's a little bit above, that can help, bring together the ministries, but not on an equal level. It can't be one ministry asking its sister ministries, oh, can you please give me information on what you've been doing? It really needs to come from a hierarchical leadership. That's at least what we've found in our experience to date with country strategies, all kinds of country strategies. And whether that is in the Prime Minister's office or its own, or in the Chancellery, Federal Chancellery, or in whatever, depending on the country's political structure, it needs to be like a notch above and have that kind of coordination mandate over the other one. So I think that's one of the components that has prevented learning from different ministries to one another. Now, at the OECD, there's another component that is, I think, also important, is not just, so you can learn from one ministry to another about data strategies, for example, but it's going to be very different if you're talking about data strategies in finance or data strategies in healthcare. But what's also quite interesting is to compare data strategies in healthcare with data strategies in healthcare of similarly sized countries with similar characteristics in other sort of countries that share similar characteristics. And that's what groups come together at the OECD to do. And it's very helpful. But it is hard because, they're not always very, it requires analysis, a lot of analysis. So that's being done, but because we have so many policies in so many countries, and right now we have 70, but we're adding 30 more. So it's a lot of countries, a lot of policies. That's where you've got the generative AI component coming in and potentially being useful at this level too, maybe at the intergovernmental level too, not just at the governmental level, or even at the public sector level. Well, it still is public sector, but here we think that this can also be quite helpful. And yes, we're at the beginning, and yes, we have had bugs, we have had hallucinations, we have had completely very realistic looking policies that were made up from scratch by ChatGPT 3 Turbo, but we've managed to find ways around that. But we imagine that this will become better and better and will be more and more useful as we can add the evaluation, the quantitative, like, did this actually work? Like on paper, it looks great, makes sense. And what about what do the numbers show? Does the numbers correlate that or not?
Thank you, Karine. I am mindful about the time, but I do want to allow, as I already nodded to people who raised their hands, please quick last round of 3 questions, the reactions from our panelists, and then we will wrap up the session. Thank you for your patience. Let's start with a colleague here. You have your microphone? Perfect.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. Good evening. My name is José Renato. I am a Brazilian researcher living here in Germany. I'm currently doing a PhD at the University of Bonn, and also founder of a think tank in Brazil, which is part of the network of centers that Armando mentioned also. And well, my question, actually I would have 2, sorry, but they're connected, I promise. So the first one, Hans Christian mentioned about okay, that they're developing their own systems and also thinking about hardware. And I mean, this part of the infrastructure, it relates a lot to also sovereignty and this kind of things. So I would like to know if there are like, if there are, and if so, what are the actions that are being taken to develop on infrastructure? Okay, here in Germany, one thing, but also would be happy to hear maybe thoughts from Kahin and Armando, if they also have anything to contribute in that regard in their work. And finally, if this is also being assessed and take into consideration the ecological impact that this have to some degree, and especially consider that the burden for this impact is unequal across different jurisdictions, territories. So yeah, thank you. That's it.
Thank you for your questions. We have a second colleague here, and then making a circle back to Joanna.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Dorian. I work at a peace and development think tank here in Berlin, research institute, not think tank. But we do some policy advice as well. I've got a human capital question more than an AI specific question. Obviously, the private sector is investing hundreds of billions of dollars into recruiting talent around AI and around generative AI. Any of you who feel like you're qualified to answer this question, where do you see the biggest knowledge gaps in the work you're doing and the challenges in finding talent? And what advice would you have for people wanting to get more involved? Thank you.
Thank you. And the third one here.
This is a super short comment and question. The comment is Ilya Nichols. That I just want to say that is absolutely right. That is consistent with the published data also. And I'm a little worried because a couple of you have said you expect that, you know, the errors will go away. They won't, right? You cannot make a good prediction off of too little data, right? So and then what we've seen is that like ChatGPT 3, they really cranked down how creative it was allowed to be. And then what that gives you is bias. Then you only have the things that are completely consensus. It's basically groupthink. And you can even see that in like the Midjourney. I don't think it's Midjourney itself, but a lot of these image things only generate, for example, white figures because that's the dominant thing in their face rec. So basically, are you guys prepared for what I consider to be the fact? But of course, sometimes we're wrong. I do have a degree in AI, but that we will never get perfection. So are you creating policies realizing that you cannot rely on it ever getting to the point where the AI is perfect?
So you're not trusting Sam Altman, who is saying that ChatGPT 5 will perfect it.
You can draw the line, and I'm not trusting Sam Altman. Apparently,
no
he's
need
not
for anything
entirely. What was the word? He's not entirely candid.
Good. Shall we start with Hans Christian this time? And this will be a last round of interventions as well.
Yep. Thank you. I'll try to be very short. On the infrastructure, yes, well, we are having infrastructure available. We are investing further into infrastructure. And yes, we are, I mean, the whole question of having green IT and paying attention to the ecological footprint, it's there. I mean, it's even going to be part of our internal AI charter at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's definitely there. Challenges to find talent. Well, the job market is as it is. For any government institution, it's quite difficult from a financial point of view to find the best talent, but you find the best talent, and part of the best talent is my team. So parts of my team are here tonight. So thank you for your continuous support and work on the various things that we are doing. What we've noticed is that don't look for people who have the perfect qualification on paper. Just look for people who know how to do things and test that. I mean, we simply did a test. We had colleagues solve a few programming exercises before recruiting or while recruiting them, and that proved to be quite useful. On the third one, Joanna, what you said, that actually very much links with one of the last points that I wanted to make, and that's once we start to use well, LLMs or large language models, for instance, in a productive way, we will certainly need to think about how to monitor, red team, and assess the quality. It's in our strategies to do exactly that, but I think that's another task, that's another package for 2024 to look at. Definitely it is. I mean, thank you for raising that again. And a final point, which is not part of the question, but which I still wanted to make, as we are, I mean, as of today, when we talk about using AI, we always want to make clear that we use it to support decision-making, not to do the decision-making. That's for us, for the time being, something that is extremely crucial. And maybe then, as my paper is completely full here, a final word, because it was mentioned, a centralized system or a decentralized system. I personally, and maybe colleagues will reflect on that over the reception, I think a decentralized system has some significant advantages because you can really move at various paces, but you need to be able to combine the efforts. And currently, I'm pretty proud of what my government is actually doing, because we managed to get together and solve things and to discuss things together. And this links very much with what Ilya is also posting here, our dear colleague from the ministry, from the BMZ.
Thank you, Hans Christian. Armando, would you like to continue your last answers to questions and last thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, great questions. Very briefly, I will say, yeah, we have definitely big gaps on infrastructure and on the digital skills and the talent that is available. I think in infrastructure, we're trying to prioritize especially the work on data infrastructures and developing some more robust data infrastructure in these countries, which I think it's important now. Also, countries such as Chile and the Dominican Republic working on improving their high performance computing centers and developing this kind of capacities, also trying to bring this into the conversation. So I hope to see some progress there. On the talent side, of course, we're going through these market dynamics, as Hans was mentioning. The market is the market, and that's nothing we can do. Of course, there are more attractive positions, especially in other countries, not especially in Latin America. So we're still fighting to build some good incentives for people to stay. I think that's still going to be very, very challenging. And on the last point, it's very interesting to hear that about how are we ready to work and develop policy and regulatory frameworks and governance around something that will not be perfect and definitely will make mistakes. And I think that that's one of the things we're doing. We're focusing a lot on the procedure more than in the substance, more than in just saying like AI has to be transparent. How can some transparency be achieved in some of these systems, understanding the technical and legal limitations that we can deal with? And that's perhaps one of the biggest concerns we have right now with the regulation, and it is that some regulators, especially in Congress, we have some legislations, a piece of legislation being discussed, which are just that, thinking that AI is going to be perfect, asking for 100% transparency, 100% accuracy, and that's where we think that we have information asymmetries with some of those decision makers, that we need to build some more knowledge with them, and that we definitely have to think twice about having this kind of regulation that perhaps it's not realistic. So that's basically where I think that there is a lot of work to do, especially in Latin America. We have seen that with these information asymmetries almost like increasing every day with all the crazy and great things and some crazy things that are going on the generative AI world and the AI world in general. So that's a challenge we have ahead, but hopefully we can do our best to inform policymakers of how this really works and what's really behind many of these projects and technology. So thank you. Those are my final thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Armando. Karine?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to close the conversation because we were running a bit late. But the question really quickly on question 1 on hardware, We've tried to keep track of initiatives to develop infrastructure and different types of infrastructure. We have an expert group on that topic that brings together the hardware providers, the NVIDIAs and Intels, and then the cloud service providers, and then the high performance computing centers at national level and others, and we've tried to, with that, to try to explain sort of pros and cons of different options, and we have definitely considered the ecological impact. We have a publication on that, and actually I participated last year and this year in the different COPs. On the question on challenge for finding talent, there's a lot of evolution that's quite interesting, and I put the link in the chat to some live data that shows the evolution. And I think what is a very surprising evolution over the past 2 or 3 years is really the rise of India, and how India has surpassed in terms of AI talent basically the rest of the world, including the United States and China. I do want to mention, I think maybe it might be obvious, but national AI talent, building out AI talent or attracting AI talent is an important part of every single national AI strategy and policy. So it really is a priority, and it is going to continue to be so, we expect. Whether we will ever get perfect AI, maybe, I don't know, but I'm not sure we'll get perfect humans as well. So that, I don't know, maybe we will get perfect humans and perfect perfect AI, but we'll see. Future will tell.
Thank you, Karine. Such a great note to end on. No perfect humans, maybe no perfect AIs, but I see one thing out there that are we ready for never getting a perfect AIs? Also, are we ready to get new things happening as well? And this is the pathway I think we are entering now with so many emerging technologies out there, but we are doing our best to catch up. And this conversation of Data Innovation Lab is also part of that, getting us all ready to be ready for the next wave of technologies and implementation. We are super over time. Thank you so much for staying with us. I hope the conversation was useful. Thank you everybody in the room and online. Thank you for your comments, and big thank you to Karine, Armando, and Hans Christian, to the entire data innovation team that organized this, to colleagues here who are supporting us in GovTech Campus. Huge applause for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for the privilege. Goodbye.